Hey folks, in this entry we'll be taking a look at Colonel William Stryker from the X-Men films, with his iteration in X-Men 2 as the focal point. In the conflict between humans and mutants, Stryker and Professor X are the kings on their sides of the chessboard, being the primary drivers for their kind. The name Stryker itself gives hint to his aggressive nature, representing his inclination to attack first. To quote him in X-Men Origins, Wolverine, he tells General Munson that preemptive action is the only action. As such, Stryker is depicted as somewhat of a foil of Charles. He begins the movie in deception by staging an attack to stir up the cycle of violence. Charles, on the other hand, exposes the truth at the end and presents an opportunity for peaceful coexistence. Charles is a telepath with the ability to control minds. However, he doesn't do this without permission, out of respect for the other person's will. Stryker doesn't have this ability inherently, but he achieves this artificially by his mind control potion. But of course, the main difference between the two of them lies in their position in the human-mutant conflict. Stryker believes that mutation is a disease, one that has to be eradicated off the face of the earth. And from his labeling of the mutant boy as a creature in this scene, it's plain to see that he considers them as abominations. In his eyes, the only good mutant is a dead one or one who is fully submitted to his control. This sentiment arose from his tragedy with his son Jason, a mutant with the ability to project his imaginations into the minds of others. After a string of unspecified events, this culminated in the death of his wife after she was driven to insanity from the projected images. Given that Jason appears to be in the vicinity of 10 years of age at the time of the incident, we would think that Stryker couldn't possibly blame him for this tragedy. Children at that age tend to misbehave, and it's likely that Jason wasn't even in control of his powers yet. But at the same time, to watch the woman you love take her own life in such a grisly fashion is likely to leave behind a significant traumatic effect. Since then, Stryker's life's mission has been steered towards one purpose: to solve the mutant problem before humanity becomes extinct. While his methods are heinous, Stryker's intention to neutralize mutation is actually understandable to an extent. Perhaps if he weren't emotionally compromised by his own tragedy, he might have been able to take a more level-headed approach. Stryker's hatred against mutants gives rise to some noticeable sadism, such as the moment when he smiles in delight while watching the imprisoned mutants receiving an electric tingle. However, the fact remains that mutants are still inherently dangerous. Beyond the death of his wife, Stryker would have seen many other instances that highlight this. For instance, Stryker would have witnessed the murder of Bolivar Trask by Mystique. He would also have heard of the alleged killing of JFK by Eric, with alleged being the key term. More recently, there was also Eric's attempt on the UN at Liberty Island. And while Stryker's attack at the start was staged, the fact still remains that there are still mutants like Nightcrawler who could have easily done what he did if they were in the mood. Bottom line, with mutants around, no one is safe, not even the most secure man or woman on the planet. If you were living in such a world, you'd probably be afraid to even walk down the street. I know I certainly would. Of course, that's not to say that the humans were not guilty of their own atrocities. It's likely that they started the conflict in the first place, but at this point, it's too late to be pointing fingers. A catastrophe on a global scale could easily happen if a mutant powerful enough got up on the wrong side of the bed. The ideal outcome would be somehow find a way to even the playing field for everyone, so that no one has any powers or abilities beyond the norm. Due to his personal bias and vendetta, Stryker chooses a horrible solution for the mutant problem, attempting to commit genocide through the use of his son and Charles. Given the amount of red lights we see in Cerebro, it's a conservative estimate that Stryker is targeting at least a third of the Earth's population. Beyond his personal tragedy, there is one more element we need to consider about Stryker, and that is his identity as a soldier. In all his actions, he maintains an outward sense of self-righteousness, justifying his actions with his duty to protect his country. He tells the president that if they'd been simply allowed to do their jobs, all this fuss with the mutants wouldn't have happened in the first place. On top of that, Stryker is still very much a soldier stuck in a war mentality, highlighted in his conversation with Senator Kelly, where he recounts his black ops missions in Vietnam and berates him for failing to comprehend the state of conflict that they are in. On the outset, Stryker looks neat and regimented, as a soldier should be, but despite being a colonel, he is hardly seen wearing a uniform in his later years. This appearance is in line with him leaving the traditional path of the military and instead going on private rogue missions that aren't officially sanctioned. Given his identity as a soldier and his innate resentment from his own tragedy, we can see why Stryker labels mutants as the enemy in an us-against-them mentality and seeks to destroy them. Whoever is not with him is against him, even other humans. He kills General Munson in the name of protecting his country, when he was about to be taken off the Weapon X program for being emotionally compromised by his mission. Yes, mutation is a serious threat, one that has to be properly addressed, but committing genocide is no appropriate solution, coming at too high a cost. Stryker's anger has consumed him to the point that he applies a blanket hatred over all mutants, even those who seek to live peacefully. He would have certainly met peaceable mutants like Charles and Kayla, who have no ill intention towards humanity. In fact, it's likely that the vast majority of mutants are just like the average layperson who mean no harm and are simply looking to get by. But sometimes a few bad apples ruin the barrel, and given his own clouded judgment, Stryker has no qualms about throwing out the baby with the bathwater. In actuality, the casualty count from his endeavor would be much higher due to the collateral damage. Earlier, I mentioned that it's a conservative estimate that mutants comprise about a third of the world's population. Should they all be mentally assaulted by Stryker's efforts, it would undoubtedly cause significant human casualties in the process, especially if the mutants happen to be in a position that would impact others, such as if they were operating a vehicle or some sort of heavy machinery. Perhaps the immediate solution at hand would be using Cerebro to identify the more dangerous mutants, the ones who are an established threat, and focus on them instead. At its core, Stryker's solution is not viable as it's not a long-term one. Ultimately, it's the X gene that is responsible for mutation, and simply killing all mutants does not ensure that new mutants will not be born and replace those who are gone. It would only be a matter of time before mutants have repopulated the Earth. So while Stryker's animosity against mutants was somewhat justified in the sense of neutralizing threats, his methods were too extreme and compromised by his own emotional bias against them. It would be hard to reach a win-win situation. Yes, there are steps needed to ensure their own survival, but not if they condemn the innocent with the guilty, regardless if they are human or mutant. At the end, he remains defiant to the last, vowing that one day someone would finish his work. Someone eventually did accomplish his mission, albeit in a peaceable fashion and without casualties, as we see with Dr. Rice in Logan.